Earlier today, Governor Charlie Baker announced that officials are setting up a program that will act as an umbrella for all the nonprofits looking to help people in the region. They hope to have that up and running soon because, as Lawrence's mayor put it, they need to focus on helping the people there.
I think along the way we've been saying that, this isn't a gas problem and this isn't an electricity problem or an infrastructure problem, that what we have is actually a human problem.
But as for the bigger fixes, those could take a while. Columbia Gas, the company responsible for the gas lines around that region, said it needs to replace 48 miles of pipeline before gas service can be restored to about 8,500 customers. It's a process that could take months. And as you can imagine, the reception of Columbia Gas's efforts has not exactly been warm and fuzzy. The company posted this photo on Twitter this morning of a note they said a sweet 6-year-old wrote them, and they were promptly skewered in the comments. As you may recall, Columbia did not issue a public statement for 5 hours after the explosions and fires started, and it was 24 hours until they set up a property claims hotline, later turning away hundreds of people who stood in line for hours over the weekend, waiting to file claims for losses like medicine and food, telling them to come back Monday. So customers might be forgiven if they don't have the greatest faith in this company at this point. For more on all this, I'm joined by State Senator Michael Barrett. He's the co-chair of the Joint Committee on Telecommunications, Utilities, and Energy. Good to see you, Senator. State Senator Bruce Tarr, whose district includes North Andover and also sits on that committee. Senator, good to see you, too.
Good to see you, Jim.
Can we start? How are things in North Andover? Obviously, one of the 3 communities affected.
Well, things have been horrible, and they're getting better. We have a situation now where public safety is not an issue. The issue of the gas has been addressed. Gas lines are shut off, but it's still an incredible disruption in people's lives. They're going to be able to have electricity, but they aren't going to have gas, and the replacement of that gas is going to take a very long time, potentially.
What role does your committee, the state legislature, have in making sure that something like this nightmare doesn't happen again, Senator?
Well, as Senator Tarr mentions, the first thing is make sure that people are safe. Step 2, I think, is to make sure that they can resume their lives. Kids need to start going to school. But there is no question that you've got to find out what the cause is and then figure out how to avoid it so it never happens again. We are very actively involved in monitoring the situation. The Senate President has been extremely upset by this and interested. The question is, we don't want to step on the feds. We do need a lead agency, somebody to really take control. That is this National Transportation Safety Board. The idea isn't to compete with the NTSB, but to make sure that we know where the state role lands and that we're prepared to do something.
Well, let me mention a role. Well, it's still, unless you know more than I do, there's still not 100% certainty of what caused this, even if we know there are a lot of old pipes. We don't know if they're the cause. Yeah. We do know, I was talking to Marty Walsh on the radio the other day, more than 50% of the pipes in Boston, for example, are more than 50 years old. We apparently have the oldest gas pipeline infrastructure, or one of the oldest, in the United States of America. And whose responsibility is it to make sure that that's dealt with?
I took a look at a case. A house exploded in my hometown of Lexington, Massachusetts in 2005. 2 things stand out to me. First of all, it took them 20 months to give a final report on the cause of the explosion. So it came through in November of 2007. And secondly, the pipes that were involved in the 2005 explosion had been laid down in 1909.
So what are you doing about
1909.
That? Can you do anything with that?
So the problem is we've got leak detection program under a statutory requirement going forward at a fast pace, but the ratepayer also gets charged for the replacement of all this infrastructure. We were very first, proudly, in the 19th century to have gas lighting, for example, in the city of Boston. Now we're paying the price for having been first. So this is another example. There are many roads, bridges, the T, where you've got to invest a lot year by year in repairing aging infrastructure. That's expensive, but we've got to bear the cost.
And is this something the legislature can force these utilities?
We actually can, Jim. I think it's important to remember, and I know Senator Barrett would agree with this, these are regulated utilities, and they're regulated for a reason. They supply things to customers that are necessities of life. They also involve things that can be extremely dangerous.
By the way, I can tell you, a lot of the people, and this is random sample, think the regulators are in the tank to the utilities and are not the ones who should be. I mean, they have the statutory authority, but they arguably trust trust more their elected representatives. I mean, let's talk about this Columbia Gas thing.
But Jim, let me give you an example of why there's a role here for regulators and the legislature. In 2008, we had a very bad situation with another utility in central Massachusetts. The legislature responded and created the statute under Chapter 25 that's actually being used today. It is what the governor put into place to cause Eversource to be able to come in and take over the situation, and it has improved markedly since they got involved.
State of emergency.
But
how about this Columbia? You know, we were talking to Seth Moulton today, the congressman who obviously represents part of the district. And, you know, it's one of these, as a layperson, I don't have any of the expertise you do around this. I'm saying to myself, Columbia Gas basically does a disappearing act. My words, not yours. And then it's sort of like, well, is Columbia Gas going to fix the problem so that when it takes over again, why are they even taking over again?
To Senator Tarr's point, this is a matter, first of all, of our putting them on a forced march to make sure they replace. But the responsibility is going to be, it's also going to cost a lot of money. Columbia Gas doesn't just serve Lawrence. It also serves the city of Springfield, the third largest city in Massachusetts. It serves Greater Brockton. So you're talking about a utility that in all has about 330,000 individual customers. Giving them the heave-ho is probably not the immediate option. Finding them up the yazoo is the immediate option. Taking away some of those profits.
Does the Public Utilities Commission, or whatever it's called, my apologies,
Department of Public Utilities,
do they have the power to fine them at the level that you consider to be?
But here's a problem. Here's a problem. It goes back to a point there is no question that the division within the DPU that monitors pipeline safety, natural gas in particular, is understaffed. Now, there hadn't been a major incident in a number of years. This company's had problems out of state. We're now going to have to staff up that division because one reason the feds stepped in, the National Transportation Safety Board, Jim, is because we have relatively few state executive branch staffers monitoring natural gas safety.
Well, that's up to you guys, right? Beacon Hill decides how much to fund.
So it definitely is. And clearly there's going to be a look at the entire infrastructure here in terms of the regulatory infrastructure. Right now we need to be focused exclusively on restoring people back to a normal life in this area.
Of course, that's a short term.
And we need to make sure that their needs are met. But, Jim, when all of that is done, that will be the opportunity for us to revisit this and take a look. So, for instance,
before you say for instance, I want to play what Congressman Moulton had to say about the issue just raised and get your reaction. Here's the congressman.
Essentially, these utilities are very monopolistic, and they recognize that the customers don't have a lot of choice. It raises a very important question about regulation writ large in the United States and where we need to be more carefully regulating monopolies.
And where does that take you if you do?
Well, I think we do regulate monopolies. The question is, are we regulating them appropriately? And so, Jim, what I want to point out is when we enacted that statute in 2008, we created significant power. Now the question is, and I'm going to be asking Senator Barrett to work with me on this issue when it's appropriate, and now it's not appropriate, but in time, to look at whether the authority should be vested in the DPU or anyone else to be able to replace an incumbent utility that has failed to meet its obligations to customers.
What do you think about that concept?
I think there has to be genuine fear of loss of revenue. You've got to put the fear of God in these companies.
Or loss of customers.
It might be changing out the utility altogether. There may be another solution as well. But you've got to make this really hurt so the utilities have the maximum incentive to see this never happen again.
How would you rate Governor Baker's performance here, Senator Barrett?
I think it was smart of him and right of him to immediately bring in a second utility because there'll be no faith in Columbia Gas. But that said, we're not going to be able to create these utilities are monopolies for a reason. You can't have dual pipes going into a house. You can't have dual telephone lines running overhead. The monopoly is going to remain, and the question is you've got to create uncertainty and the potential threat and loss of customers even so, to get these people to act.
Give me a quick Governor Baker assessment on this deal from you.
I think the governor's done an outstanding job in taking control of the situation and communicating information, because that's been one of the issues here that's been plaguing the situation is Columbia Gas has not been communicating with the public. And folks in these situations, Jim, want answers. Their lives have been upended. They need to know what's going on. I think the governor has done a good job at trying to address that.
Can I raise one last issue? Maybe this, well, it didn't just occur to me. I think the night before these explosions, the president of one of the steelworkers unions who's involved in the National Grid lockout was sitting right where you are, Senator, and a guy who was diagnosed, a worker who was diagnosed with a tumor on his bladder, a cancerous tumor in his bladder, a week before their health benefits were taken away. Quickly, if you can, what he said to us here, and again, I take it at face value, is that the workers who replaced them, gas workers, had inadequate training. Many of them were new. What if National Grid had been the company in your district serving the people in North Andover? What kind of even greater nightmare might that have been?
Well, it could have been, Jim, and that's why we have to look at whether we have appropriate oversight and whether replacement workers are qualified. That is the role of state government. This may be a monopoly, but it's not a monopoly with free rein.
So is it time for you guys to get involved in this National Grid thing? Again, it's not a strike, it's a lockout.
Okay. A number of us have been putting some pressure, we hope, on the administration and on National Grid in particular to see an early settlement of this. There's no question that there's a potential threat here and that we've got to do something about it.
Senator Barrett, good to see you.
Good to
Thanks
talk
so
to
much.
you,
Good
Jim.
luck with your work. Senator Tarr,
Thank you
appreciate
very
it.
much.
Thank you both so much.